Hello, welcome to the Daily Bible Podcast. My name is William Hemsworth. Thank you so much for joining me in today's episode. Well, if you're new to the show, we go through the Bible verse by verse, and December 1st we started with Matthew chapter 1, and today we're going to look at Matthew chapter 5, verses 19 and 20. So we're continuing on the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5. A lot of great teaching of Jesus is here. I encourage you all to go back, read it for yourself, spend some time in it, pray about it. You definitely won't regret it. But Matthew chapter 5, verses 19 and 20 say, "Therefore whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. But I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." So if you joined me on yesterday's episode, we talked about Jesus coming to fulfill the law. He didn't come to abolish it, he came to fulfill it. He came to tell us what living the law really meant. It wasn't just an outward thing that we did, but it's something that we did by God's grace. So later on, we're going to see this tomorrow, where he says, you shall not murder, means a lot more than shedding someone's blood. It means, calling them a fool in anger, hurting their reputation, gossiping, things like that. Takes it a step further, tells us how to live as Christians. So yesterday's verses go hand in hand with today's verses. Now here, Jesus isn't criticizing the Pharisees for their strict observance of the law, but he's criticizing them for their emphasis on their outward conformity to it. He's criticizing them for living the law, but not being changed by the law. They didn't have that proper inner attitude. So by focusing on the outward signs, they were avoiding the real intent of what the law was intended for. And there's a section of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I wish I found it, but it pops into my mind, that says that the Pharisees were seekers after smooth things. And it calls them that because they compromised the law. They twisted the law to fit their own lives. And doing things like that removed the intent of what the law was meant to do. It removed that need for grace and that dependence that we need on God to even live what the law says. And so in the following verses, we're going to see that Jesus restores that true nature of what the law demands. And Jesus demands a deeper obedience from us and not a disregard of the laws of God. And so that's what we're going to see in the coming verses when Jesus says, if you even call a man a fool in anger, that you're guilty of murder, or if you look at a woman lustfully in your heart and that you're guilty of adultery. It's calling us to a higher standard. So let's live that higher standard today. Let's be that light to those around us. Because you never know. By just being that light, they're going to say, hey, that person has something that I want. And that could open that door for a conversation on who Christ is and what he did for all of us. God bless you guys. Thank you for joining me in this episode of the Daily Bible Podcast. As always, if you've enjoyed the show, please rate it, please share it. God bless you guys. Thank you again for joining me.